Today, we're diving into a story that's really about survival. It's about a hidden history and a culture that simply refused to be erased. We're going to explore the absolutely incredible story behind the hidden books of the Chum.
I mean, just look at this. It's ancient, it's fragile, and it's clearly water damaged. This is a book that someone was literally willing to die for. You have to understand, this isn't just paper and ink. It's like the soul of a community, a really fragile link to a past that was almost completely wiped out.
And that's a quote from Soleh Abdullah, the man who saved this very book. Think about what he's saying. He buried his sacred texts, his kitabs as they call them, right by a river. He knew the water might ruin them. But the other option, getting caught by the Khmer Rouge, well, that was a certain death sentence. Not just for him, but for his entire family. So that really brings us to the heart of it, right? What on earth could be written in these pages that would make them so incredibly dangerous? And who are these people, the Cham, who would choose the risk of a flood over the certainty of a genocidal regime, all to protect their heritage? Okay, to really get why someone would make that sacrifice, we have to go back in time. And I mean way back. Back to a powerful ancient kingdom that, honestly, most of the world has completely forgotten about. All right, so let's get our bearings. Take a look at this map. This shows us the Kingdom of Champa, right around the 10th century. You can see how it just hugs the coastline of what we now know as central and southern Vietnam. This was a civilization that was totally defined by the sea.
And when I say ancient, I mean it. It was established almost 2,000 years ago. And Champa wasn't some quiet, isolated place. No way. It was this thriving hub of international trade, a real crossroads of culture that was a major player for centuries.
Now, what's so cool about this slide is how it shows you just how unique their identity was. So on the left, you got their own script, this beautiful, complex writing system, and on the right, one of their temples. Now, while their famous neighbors, the Khmer, were building these massive stone cities like Angkor, the Cham became masters of brick. They created these incredible towering structures, a totally different style. And this right here, this perfectly illustrates the two sides of their history. On one hand, you have this incredible artistry, like the stunning sculpture you see, but on the other hand, a long, complicated history of conflict. That carving on the right is so fascinating. It's actually from a Khmer temple, the Bayon, and it shows a crazy naval battle between the Khmer and the Cham. They were rivals, they were neighbors, and sometimes they were just bitter enemies. But, after centuries of that conflict, the Kingdom of Champa did eventually fall. The Cham people, though, they didn't just disappear. They migrated, and a lot of them found a new home in the land of their old rivals, Cambodia. Now, this didn't happen all at once. It was more like a slow exodus that stretched over hundreds of years. As you can see from this timeline, wave after wave of Cham people were forced out of their homeland after these devastating defeats. It got to the point where even their monarchy had to flee, seeking refuge in Cambodia to try and build a new life. And this is where a really fascinating split happens in their culture. The Cham who stayed behind in Vietnam, they largely held on to their Hindu and Buddhist traditions. But the Cham who moved to Cambodia, over time, they converted to Islam. This huge religious shift became a central part of the Cambodian Cham identity, and it set them apart from both their ancestors and their new Khmer neighbors.
But that unique identity, their distinct language, their religion, their history, that is exactly what would eventually make them a target. And this brings us back to the horrifying tragedy that started our story.
You see, for 4 terrifying years, between 1975 and 1979, the Khmer Rouge regime tried to force this vision of a purely agrarian Khmer society. And anyone who didn't fit that narrow mold was seen as an enemy to be eliminated. The Cham, with their different religion and culture, were systematically targeted for destruction. And this wasn't just random violence. It was a calculated, systematic attempt at cultural erasure. Think about it. Speaking their own language was forbidden. Practicing their religion was banned. Their mosques were literally torn to the ground. And their religious and community leaders, they were often the first to be murdered. That's why simply having a religious book was a death sentence. And now it all makes sense. Now we understand. Hiding those books wasn't just about saving an object. It was a profound act of defiance. It was a desperate gamble to keep the flame of their culture alive, while the Khmer Rouge was doing everything in its power to extinguish it. He was basically preserving their laws, their spirituality, their very identity in a hole in the ground by a river. But the regime fell, and against all odds, the Cham people survived. So the next chapter of the story is one of just incredible resilience. It's about the slow, painful process of rebuilding from almost nothing. Survivors actually described it as coming back step by step. The first steps were physical, rebuilding their homes, their mosques. But then came the much harder part, restoring what was invisible. An entire generation had grown up in terror, completely cut off from their own history. The elders who made it through felt this urgent, desperate need for books, for materials, for anything to teach their children who they really were. And that brings us to the source material for this whole thing. The book you're looking at here, it was created by researchers working side by side with Cham survivors. It exists to answer that very call, to give the next generation a way to connect with their own history and to understand the incredible sacrifices that were made to preserve it.
So we end right back where we started, with this huge question. The story of the Cham, it shows us that culture isn't just in giant stone monuments, because those can be destroyed. It's in the stories we tell, it's in the languages we speak, and it's in the books we are willing to die for. It really forces us to ask, what does it truly take to keep a memory alive when someone is trying to erase it from existence?